Wow, such an honor to be here. I'm very, very excited to be here at Disobey. So, when I was preparing for this talk, I was told that it's extremely important that you have a table of contents so you know the audience is going to know what we're not going to talk about. But we've got about 340 slides to go through in 45 minutes, so we are not going to do that. So, hi, my name is STÖK, and welcome to my talk, Weaponizing Plain Text ANSI Escape Sequences as a Forensic Nightmare. And it's kind of like this, the thing that when I spent shitloads of time just digging into this CVE 150 bug class that's been dormant for about 20 years, and the story, what came out of it. And before I do things that I do now, I used to travel the world to all these live hacking events and create educational videos over at YouTube. But nowadays, I fight cybercrime over at TrueSec. And one thing that we're really good at is to do forensic investigations. And just like Who is and all the other guys here, we know that forensic people, they're quite passionate about their log files. So, and they want all of them. They're super greedy. So I figured that if we like log files that much, are they really that important? And I got a shitload of great answers coming in. And to be honest, like the short answer is yes, because logs are a vital component for maintaining applications reliability, their performance and security. But there seems to be this common idea that logs don't lie, but people do. So it makes me kind of feel and think about your log files. Do you trust them? And what would happen if you don't? So let's imagine for a second that you are now the incident response lead for, or you're the manager at some kind of company, and you're actually the IR lead for a global logistics corporation, and it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're sound asleep in your bed, right? And you're dreaming about containers, or Docker, if that's your thing. I mean, cargo. And then you get a bit of a rude awakening from your manager, and he's pissed. So since you are the IR lead, it's your job to wake up the incident response team and make sure that they get started on doing what they do best, which is collecting them logs all over. But since you're a manager and you work at this really professional company that done your homework, so you log shipping, you log into your big data app 4000 and select the timetable for the attack and just choose, you export the data into this everything.logs file, which is great. So sitting on your computer, you're spinning up your local terminal, and you cat the file because you want to kind of see if there's anything in there. In the beginning, everything looks all great. And then suddenly in the middle of something, boom, this happens. And you start to realize, like, what? Did I just get an ad in the middle of my log file that offers me a way to get my stuff back? And at the same time, the attackers were kind enough to supply me with a calculator so I could kind of figure out how much the restore cost is going to be. And when you sit in there contemplating this situation, that's kind of when you started to realize that, shit. And the whole reason why this even works is thanks to the magical thing called ANSI Escape Sequences. And what put me on this track is that I stumbled upon this CVE. Since I'm a bug hunter, critical 9.8 means money. So I figured that would be something good to go after. So I started to look into it. And I'm just going to read this straight out for you. So we do this together. And this was a CVE in rack. So effective versions of this package are vulnerable to arbitrary code injection. Sounds good. There's a possible shell escape sequence injection vulnerability in rack's lint and common logger components. carefully crafted request can cause a shell escape sequence to be written to the terminal via racks, lint middleware, and common logger middleware. These escape sequences can be leveraged to possibly execute commands in the victim's terminal. Excuse me, tiny STÖK. What do you mean possibly? Either you can or you cannot run arbitrary commands, right? Well, thank you for shipping in, Giant STÖK. It's very kind that you're asking these questions. And, well, kind of depends on the terminal. And terminals are something that most of us use on a daily basis. They come in many shapes and forms. Everything from, you know, the ones that you download or the built-in ones like VS Code and Docker. Then you have third-party applications like iTerm and Kitty if you're on Mac, or, you know, terminal.app that's coming shipped with Mac OS, Windows Terminal, PutX Terminal, shitload of different brands. And you have all these cloud CLIs as well, because when we want to maintain or change something on our virtual cloud box, we are doing that. And these things are terminals as well because they connect over TTY and all good. And most of them are built on Xterm.js. So I figured that I had a good attack surface, but I wasn't really interested in the possibly. I was into running commands on shit. But hey, I had no idea where to start. So I did the thing that any self-respecting security researcher would do. I Googled, what are ANSI escape sequences? Because I had no idea. And I quickly figured out that these are the things that makes fun colors inside our terminals. And it seems like there's ways for people to customize those. And depending on what kind of operational system, it seems like you're really into customizing those, especially if you're an ARC user. Then it seems like the shit. But I also realized that in 1978, the Gillstrand Boys dropped their banger album, We're Gonna Have Some Fun Tonight. But even though it was released in the same year, the VT100 wasn't probably the interest of the Gillstrand Boys, even though, you know, patching that into serial cables into this huge VAX computer, which looks badass, would probably be my kind of idea of a good time on a Saturday. That's not what they did. No, good 70s. So I kind of realized that ANSI escape codes are the things that puts colors on your screen. But they're also the ones that move your cursor around, or you're able to remap your keys and even print stuff like bing. And using ANSI escape codes, they're also responsible for creating stuff like this that we use on more or less a daily basis. This, just by using ANSI escape sequences, you can paint stuff like this. And if you look into the standard, it's tricky to understand. It's really deep and it's really hard. And even though you're super smart people, I wasn't. So I'm going to break down the basics for you, how it works. Because the first time I looked at the standard, it says this: CSI, PMM, character attribute, something, something. I'm like, what? What's that? And to be honest, that's actually this. You put in a good old hello and some characters, and what it does is that it turns the text green, which is great. And the reason why all of this works is thanks to the escape characters. And now I hear you're thinking like, yeah, but why didn't they write the CSI, the escape character first? Because the escape character is a non-visible character. So why even write it in the documentation? So, I realized that this character also comes in many shapes and forms. Like, all these do the same thing. It's just that they are represented in different ways. That's why you call them escape. Because Bash seems to like Octal, and Python seems to like hex, Java likes Unicode, and PowerShell uses decimal for some weird reason. And if we break this down here, we will see that first have an escape character, then we have this CSI known as the control sequence introducer. Then we have a number, which is the parameter for what color we're using. 32 is green. And then M means that we're setting the attribute. We type in the string that we want, and to make sure that we close it off, like we want to stop sending green, we need to add another escape sequence. We're having another CSI there. 0 means reset to normal output, and then close it off with, on the end here, with a string terminator, the ding kind of character. And if you, like me, accidentally grepped some arbitrary file and your computer goes ding, 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 that's the bell character getting rendered. So we got some good old escape sequences coming in there. But if we instead not escape it properly, what's going to happen is that everything is just going to turn green. And this is something that we're going to keep further down the line, but it's good for you to understand that if you don't close it off, weird things happen. So this is a stored example of this. Let's printf this into a bad log and see what happens. Well, if we interact with the file using vim, well, it's going to look like this, all good. And you can see here on the screen, the small thing sign there means that that's the escape character. Escape character, bracket thingy, that's the escape character. Same thing if you go for nano. And if you're viewing it in the browser, it's going to turn into Unicode by magic. So you see it's Unicode here instead. But, and this is where it gets interesting, if you use cat, it's going to render it. Same for grep, tail, awk, and even curl. And first time I just interacted with it with curl, I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And I started to think about, so if I could put things in the title of a web page and get it to render bad stuff inside curl, where else could I put it? And I realized the source of all evil is DNS. So why not put it in there? I'm like, let's see how it goes. Smashed it in my text record. I'm like, boom, this is going to be nasty. Nothing happened, because this is beautifully escaped. You can see that it uses the double slash. That means that it's getting escaped properly and it's all good. That's on my OS X computer. But on Windows, on the other hand, well, it doesn't do it properly. So then it just looks all good. Thanks, David, for that. OK, so we're able to put colors in there. But is this even remotely a security issue? So, because right now it feels kind of like this self-executive situation where you're like, oh, yeah, that's fun. So as the researcher I am, I need to figure out, like, who, where, and kind of how would this be an issue, and what would be the consequences of someone running this? Well, obviously, log injection would be the where, because it's carefully crafted request calls shell escape sequences written to the terminals, blah, 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 middleware logger. I'm like, OK, cool. So logs are important. Who would be the person that would be the target for this attack? Well, DevOps, apparently, because they work with that. Sysadmins, IR forensic people that love log files, or more or less anyone that just interacts with log files generally, or using a terminal, kind of. So doing this in a research way, I wanted to figure out, like, how can I make sure that I do this properly? And looking at the OWASP standard for log injection, it says that data needs to enter the application from an untrusted source, which means that we need to put it in there. The data is written to the application or a system log file, which is cool. But we also need to figure out what are our success factors. And in this case, these are all built around XXS and stuff, so I needed to manipulate them a bit. And say, injection of new bogus log events, which is us pushing stuff in there and changing stuff. Injection of the escape sequence, hoping that the malicious log event is viewed in a terminal emulator, because if you're using it in a browser, it's not going to work. Injection of commands that a terminal emulator would execute. That's my checklist. So I'm like, OK, where can I start doing this? What would be checking all my boxes for my lab? And that would be Docker, because Docker loves to put everything to standard out, no matter what it is. And it has this built-in terminal, and it comes with a nifty pre-configured web app for you to play around with. And if you really want to interact with the Docker logs, you either need to Docker attach them to your container, or you just do some Docker logs kind of follow tail thingy, and things would just be put in your standard out, which is great. So I figured that, OK, we have this color thingy. we can't just put that straight into the browser, so we need to URL encode it first. So I did that. Had this nice little string in my local host thing, and just sent it away. And at first I'm like, oh, no replies, boring. But then I looked up a bit, and I started to look into the log, and I saw, holy fucking smokes. We got a new line, we got some colors injected there, and on the first try, we checked all the boxes for the research. Like, win, cool. Because remember, even though we just put the new line and the colors there, this is kind of what we could do. It's all about how creative we want to be and whatever output we want to put on the screen. So I'm like, yeah, confirmed, research, go. The Gillstrand boys, though, not really impressed. They want an impact, because changing colors in your log files isn't cool enough. So I started to dig into this rabbit hole, and I realized that H.D. Moore, back in 2003, had found shitloads of cool stuff. And what they figured out is that you had the possibility to write to the terminal's title. So if you put that in, boom, it's going to end up on your terminal. And that's cool enough, but no. He dug into the standard and all the CSI codes and realized that 21T, that one will report back whatever was written to the title to your command line. Whatever kind of problem could happen there, I wonder. So in this case, that would render this presenter kind of thing on your terminal and your presenter, and boom. But this is from 2003, so this is obviously fixed, right? So I started to dig some more, and I found some really cool research by Evil Alive, Jekyll and ANSI from 2010, where they found all these vulnerabilities in all these different web servers that had problem with the log shit. They're using the OEC2 too, so that's fixed as well. And then eventually, Evitar Gersey stepped on my radar and had some really cool thing where he was able to create this DOS sequence by writing continuously to the title. But hey, that's fixed too. So in the middle of my research, this is just epic failure. So I figured that, what can I do now? I can't grep the internet good enough to identify any way forward. So I did the thing you have to do in the end. I reached out to the original reporter and said, can I have RC epoch, please? And it was kind enough to answer. And he said, yeah, no, I didn't create any. I just pointed them to this research, and that was enough. I'm like, because that's fixed. And that wasn't cool enough for me. So I was kind of left with all this old stuff that didn't work at all. And that's kind of, I mean, speaking of old stuff, this is what I looked like in the 80s. I'm just kidding. I'm probably looking more like this badass here, right? But I wanted to put some extra attention of the angle of the arm here, because that's exactly the same angle as this gentleman has in this image here from this band poster from the 60s. And what's really interesting is that this gentleman here was the first person in Sweden to sell Unix computers and bring them to the market. And he's also my dad, so I'm very grateful to him to give me access to computers at an early stage. Thank you. But when I'm standing here and starting to look at this and thinking my dad is cool, I'm starting to realize that maybe I'm looking more like Lasse that was on the same tour as my dad when he met my mom. Anyway, the standard is really, really vast and super deep. And even though, the most developers here thought that it was a cool idea that all these features worked, that wasn't good enough for them. No. They wanted more features. So they invented something called proprietary escape codes. And proprietary escape codes is the thing that makes this. It makes your terminal fancy. All these cool things like notifications and background changes and all that, that's custom code that's built on top of the standard. Some ideas were probably not that as good and implemented. Like, okay, that could be a bad idea. Speaking of bad ideas, I'm happy this fucker isn't around anymore. So I needed something that you needed to dig down deep. So I wanted something that was adapted, trusted, and nice. So we could weaponize. Because we are tricksy little hobbitses, aren't we? Especially in the offensive research the research realm. And I wanted things that are so commonly adapted that you couldn't patch that fucker. So I found OSC 8. And if you ever used PowerShell and you typed it wrong and you get this message like, you need to go visit this page and click here. That is actually this. This is how it looks. It's OC8 that says that this URL thingy, and then whatever title you want, and it's going to print out, and it's going to be a link in there in your terminal. You click it, it's going to call your browser, and you're good. Initially, HTTP and HTTPS was only allowed. But then the fine people over at Windows or Microsoft thought it was a great idea to implement the option of using file as a good way to just, find local files, whatever you wanted to link to. So let's put a little bit of CMD magic in there, put the line out, click it, and boom. Oh, what possibly could go wrong here? I mean, that's interesting. In this case, you're not able to add any parameters, so it's sad puppy that way. But I was doing this talk at Sectea, and some guy had seen my talk at Black Hat and said, I found a solution for that. You can use Java and just use that and route it through, and then you're going to be able to just pop things. I'm like, you rule. That's the value of sharing cool stuff. And you also have this one here. If you're using SSH, for instance, on a Mac OS, it's going to, by default, try to connect to a SSH host. So if I click the link here, boom, that's going to automatically connect, and you got a DNS callback, whatever, or a session connected. That's great if you want to know somebody's fiddling around your files. And what's really interesting, in the beginning we said that you need to terminate things because otherwise they will just keep on going. What happens if we don't terminate this one? Well, then everything just turns into one big log. And that just works in different ways. I mean, some of the terminals have protections against this. So they'll ask you, are you sure you really want to click this thingy? Others don't. So I figured that, OK, in my lab, what happens if I put this in? Well, there's everything is now one big link. And there's specific kind of protections of how to use the URI. What is really interesting in a Mac OS X is that you can also use the URI man, which is the man handler. Can be some interesting research coming out there, who knows? But it's not always that it protects you, so sometimes it just smashes. And even though that's cool, everybody knows that if things just calls out, we fucking hate them, so snitches always get stitches, right? But if I'm doing a red team engagement, I want to put out some nice tripwires, so I want to know if the forensics team is on my ass or not. So if they're using Mac OS X, this is a built-in feature that works in all of them. Because if we're willing to change the tab and we want to be in the same directory, what it's automatically going to do is that it's going to check what current directory you're in and then just putting that in a new tab. OC 7 allows you to do that on your own. So it's a non-visual thing. So if we put that in the log file here, what's going to happen is automatically it's just going to call back home. Because it's by design, it's just going to do a DNS lookup, and voila, if somebody's fiddling around with the log files that you tainted, which is great. And then we have image support. Because text is not good enough. No. We want real images inside our terminals, right? So the developers over at Microsoft thought it was a good idea too, and this has been implemented in iTerm and other ways before. And it's called Sixel, and it's an inline image protocol. And I mean, I have no real issues with that, but it kind of gives you the idea that you could potentially put things inside log files that really shouldn't be there. And how many of you would like to see what's in this image or this log file? Yeah, you're old enough. I love you. Well, it's not what you thought it was. Seriously. We're all grown-ups here. But it makes you think, right? And then we have OSC 52. And if you ever use tmux, or if you're old school, and you wanted to connect to a shell, and you wanted to copy-paste that shit, didn't work. But tmux and other things use something called OC52, which means that it's sending things to your local clipboard buffer. That's great, because if we have chances to put things in local clipboard buffers, why not? So, and the whole thing is that it's based around this base64 thing. And in this case, we have the open calculator. And if you're running that in, let's say, the CSH have this thing that you run it first, it populates into your clipboard, and when you paste it, it's going to give you a warning that says requires user interaction, whatever. And not a warning, you're just going to put it on whatever command line you have. So you need to push enter, and it pops. Bash, on the other hand, different story. Because if you paste it in there, it's just going to pop. But because it honors new lines, fun. I mean, and I'm starting to think about what could we do here? So, can we add multiple new lines, and which of the terminals are vulnerable to this? So you run it, it populates your clipboard buffer, and you start to go through. And I tested a bunch of different ones to see, how it worked. Some of them, it just pops. Other ones give you warning, depending on what shell you're using. And I know this is not, it all depends, but it's cool. And if you saw the last one here, that gave you warning. And that warning is on Windows, and it looks like this, that it gives you like 6 lines of some clipboard thing. But if you add some more, hey, you need to scroll, and what happens if you only use spaces in there? I mean, then it's going to work too. And if you really want to socially engineer people to clicking thing, just put a EULA in there. People are going to click through that in a second. So I'm like, okay, that's cool, but that worked on Windows, the other one didn't, so why not make a polyglot of this? Because we can. So this long base64 one is actually this. Starts with a couple of new lines, so you get out of the warning area. And then we have this nice XXS SVG loading. We're cutting it off with a nice stop sign there. Then there's some curl. And in this case, I'm just calling like my local host to make sure that I don't fuck things up. And then for Windows, we have some PowerShell mumbo jumbo and put that into a file. So let's see what happens when we run this. Well, it stores in the memory, you paste it, some you get some warnings, other ones you run it and it just execute, like, oh, no, oops, that was nice. You saw the host name and stuff that we put in there. It honors variables. We love that too. So you can get shitloads of information and just collect data from whatever user, whatever thing you do using. Awesome. And that's just one of the things you can do. You can also create reverse shells if you kind of wanted to. It depends on your creativity. But if people see that that's happening, they're just going to scream and shout and say, no, I don't want that. So we kind of need to hide our tracks a bit and mess things up. So there's different ways that we can hide our characters. Like in this example here on WinRAR, for instance, where you have this RAR file. You unpack that, and it says that, okay, it's not virus in here, but not virus is a file that's actually is not virus. It's just printed out there. Virus is the one. So it's going to end up on your computer. So it's a way to be really sneaky. If you look into what is inside, it looks legit, and afterwards it's shit. So that's a nice way to do it. And you can also move around the cursor and clear the scroll back screen and everything, so you just make people pissed. I'm going to show this like here. I put 50 lines on the one, do H backup, and then backslash, and what that means that go to the start or whatever and begin again. And if we run that in Docker, for instance, I fucked up my Docker with this. So you run in that one, it's going to clear it. So whenever I try to get in, it's going to start from the beginning, and it's loading things, and then hit the character, boom, you're back at the stop again. So the only way to get through that is you need to really go in and then move that character out, if you can find it. And that is somewhat annoying. Sorry, IR team. But if we weren't really be annoying, we need to DOS and brick shit. So, and I like to live off the land, so there's different ways we can do that. Printing, for instance. kind of hate printers in a way. So we can use this thing here. We can use the escape sign, CSI 01, and then you send it out, then it starts a print job. Imagine getting that like every 5 minutes or so. Somewhat annoying. And if we really want to be annoying, we can do it like this. Because 5i means that you're sending it to the printer. But back in the days, they used to have these matrix printers that would automatically like, write the log file straight into a hardware copy. We can still do that, though. But since we don't have any printer, it's just going to be sent out into oblivion. There's nothing there. There's nothing taking it. So all the data from wherever you start that character is just going to be non-visible, and you have no idea what happened, and the only way for you to get out of it is to close the terminal or your session. That is really annoying. But it's not annoying enough. So I started to dig into this, and I realized there's something called mouse tracking and mouse reporting. And if you're ever installed like a Slackware or something similar in the beginning, or maybe a Debian, and suddenly you realize that your mouse just works, and you're like, oh, success, nice. And that's due to mouse tracking. It tracks where you are. And you can use one of the commands like this one here. I know it's long, but what it's going to do is that it's going to print out whatever character movement you have on your mouse on your screen. So it's going to take over everything, and whatever you move around, you know, that's going to go out, and then if you accidentally click on something, you're going to execute. Imagine sneaking stuff in there. And then you have this one here. Oh, this is beautiful. The CSI PSB looks so harmless. And what it actually does is that it says that, okay, we're going to repeat the preceding graphic character X amount of times, like this. So I have this one here. Please play it 10 times, and you get 10 peace signs. I mean, what happens if we put 1 billion peace signs in there? Well, he's going to honor that too. So please, do not run this in prod. Because if you're playing around with this, my Docker died to the extension that it tried to render like 1 billion times of peace signs, but since the peace sign is an emoji, you get 5 characters for the price of 1. So it's shitloads of things. So my fans went on, and then suddenly it just tipped over. And the only way to get through it was to reset the computer, because Docker Desktop just died. Whenever I touched that one and accidentally touched the logs or whatever, it's just going to take over. And all these other applications, they just bricked. They can't handle it. They go in for a while, and they just die. So I figured that, I wonder if I spin up a web server and I put that in the server header and then request a Let's Encrypt certificate, and all the scanner boys come running, I wonder what's going to happen with the log files. Because you can. Because what happens if you run this and you put it in there, things are just going to smash. What do you say? Scary-looking kid? You got a question? Yeah, sure. What do you got? If I didn't get any RC? No? Not yet. Oh, dude. Okay. In my research, these are the sad times. I mean, I think I have a bunch of cool stuff, but I don't have any RCE. None of the arbiter command injection shit. And this is where David Ledbeater steps in and just becomes the light in my life for a short period. Because his talk over at Blue Hat in February, I think, didn't contain one CV with an RC. No, it had 6 of them. And I'm like, sweet. I wonder how this works. And it seems like he found out the way where you can add some new lines in there and then replay it back. And if you want to check out David's work, he's awesome, has shitloads of CVs out there, and works in Kubernetes. And he did a really cool talk at DEF CON on the Sunday, where he goes through all these vintage shit, 60 years back or so. And he recently released this blog post just going through all that shit. So if he didn't step in, you know, it wouldn't work for me. I thought that was cool. The Gillstrand boys thought that was cool too. So we're just going to look in a bit into his research, because why not? So if you have this one here, and this was for iTerm and RCE, and there's been variations of this one released afterwards, but you need to understand how it works. So what it actually does is that adds return in a new line, then it, says some mumbo jumbo, and then we have this one here, the one that says $QM03, which means that, okay, I want to know what kind of color that is on the screen. But he found a weakness where he realized that what he could do is that I want to know what color you have the screen, and here's the string, and it's going to remember that. And what you need to do in the next line is just request whatever kind of information you had on the screen. And the result, if you're using iTerm at that time, is that you go through this web app, you're having fun, and then you're like pasting that one in here into it, and it's going to pop calc on your local box. Sweet. So now we have arbitrary command injection by interacting with a log file. And I really like that, because that's kind of the thing that I was going for. And once again, we see here, we read in, tell that we want the open calculator, do that, and then we request back what kind of color was it, and it's just going to put that on side of, you're going to report it back, just like you did with the mouse character, right? And then we add a new line in there. You can see the new line, and then you just pop, it works. So I'm very grateful for the research that David did, because he was like my Mike Metzger moment. Because before Mike did a backflip on a motocross in competition, it was like these rumors that it couldn't be done and whatever. Nowadays, if you don't do like a double backflip, you suck. So it was kind of pushing the bar a bit, which means that I now had the confidence that it could be done. So I opened up Kitty and looked at their documentation. It's like, 5 transfer over TTY. That looks cool. I wonder what that does. And realized that test reflected. So I wonder what happens if we put a new line in open calculator app in there and send that in. So, okay, let's see what happens if I push that in. And what's going to happen is that first you get this question if you really want to accept the transfer. You say, no, boom, you got calc. Sweet. And I hear you thinking like, yeah, but you said no, so let's see what happens if we do the other one. So what happens if we say yes instead? Oh, you get the same result. So it's a win-win, whatever you do. I thought that was funny. The Gillstrand boys, they thought that was funny. So that was real cool. And I started to realize that there are different things that you can do that is quite sneaky, like this VS Code thing here. If you're ever using VS Code, the terminal there, you have these nice buttons, like these small circles that you can point at, and then you can right-click that one and say, I want to rerun whatever command I had. And that is great if you're using the shell kind of integration thingy. But OSC 633:E means explicitly set the command line. I'm like, I wonder what happens if I smash that one in. Well, this is going to happen. You cat your file. You think you're going to run cat again. You run it, and it's going to pop calc for you. Beautiful. Then you're sneaking things in there. And I can see some of your black boxers out there and say, how would I identify this? Well, you should look for 400 or 500 errors, because normally access logs, they get well sanitized, but we want to end up in the ones where the real errors contain, because if somebody really want to dig into solving the problem, they're going to access those. So one thing that we could do is, let's take this JSON request and have some value, blah, blah, blah. Then just append some Unicode on the end and send it in. If you get a response back like this, where it's not sanitized, which means that, like this is escaped properly, you got an extra slash in there, then it's a big chance that it ends up being a log file. Same goes for this one here. Like, if you really want to push it in, then you use the non-visible hex sign in there, send it in, and then again, it's a big chance that it ends up in there. And, but bear with me, it's a lot of false positives getting in there because some error messages will be stripped, you don't know, and there's no data in the response or whatever. But this thing seems to be everywhere. And it was in Kibana, it was in Elastic, it was in Splunk, and in GitHub, and all this has been fixed now, which is great. And there's different kind of fixes. I mean, I think the crew over at GitHub made it kind of cool because they are still allowing you to push colors in there, but whitelisting only colors. So you can't fuck around with other things. Kibana crew, though, it took them 4 times to figure out how to solve it, because you could sneak in a little bit of a null byte in there to break the regex, or you can move things around. They had quite the challenge, but they solved it. And Splunk was good enough to, rebuild their whole system because they realized they were shit anyway. So and then I experimented, and I created one for nuclei. So what happens if I fuss this? But before you go all burr and you send this off, bear with me that you need access to the log files to identify if it's actually in there. So in this case, you'll see that it ends up. And that is like the whole thing. So I have come to the conclusion that it's actually possible to execute commands in the victim's terminal by injecting things in the log files. And I've said, yeah. But I can hear you think but whose fault is it? Because this has been the fight going on for like a century, where the terminal developer says, no, it's the app developers. And the app developers say, no, it's the terminals that needs to sanitize correctly. And then there's all these OG developers in the back that's like, but everybody with a brain knows that you can't just cat any file anywhere or click on an email link. But that's actually not true, because as security professionals, even though maybe some of us are more malicious ones, we need to protect our users, especially our shell users, because they are privileged users. And it's a really simple mindset to this. We need to sanitize our input and escape our output. If we don't, there'll be consequences. And if you feel like you want to try this, I created this POC site for you. This is fine. But if you curl that, and if you can just right-click it and just look into it and see all the commands is in the source. What it actually is this bunch of different commands that are running. And if we run those in a different kind of terminal, we get different kind of results. So it's a good test bench if you want to play around and fuck with it, because results are going to vary. I mean, I madly love this. That's good. It's like you run it and it dies. And just because I can, next speaker is Jonah, and he's going to get on. So I figured that he's not going to have enough time to fix his stuff. So, I smashed that one in, and if you find the title, that's going to smash too, because he's not escaping his shit properly. Sorry, bro. Mad love, though. So let's recap this. People do tend to forget, because the old new is the new, and there's so much more to come in this kind of attack vector, because this is everywhere. I mean, it even popped inside nuclei when I was trying to figure out the template. And it's easy to forget that something that feels like meh today can turn into oh crap by tomorrow, depending on who spends times on it. So honestly, your log files, do you still trust them? Hi, I'm STÖK, Fredrik on all social media, and thank you for attending my talk.